Hello, Zeteo
Game
here. Today we're doing a
started.
speedcast, and the game is starting already. Let's just take a look here. We got Therxy spawned at the bottom left-hand position as our red Armada guy. And at the top right, we have Alt F4 Ubivator spawned as our Cortex blue guy at the top right. And this is IsidisCrack. So this map, you know, there's a big crack in the middle, thus the name. There's also some cracks near this high ground here. Bots can traverse up here, but not across this crack. So this can be a defensive point. And quite honestly, I'll probably start calling this like your home turf or your home area that you need to just have at all times. Primarily because, like, generally you send a con out to these directions and start grabbing these mexes because those are your big clusters of 3, and they're somewhat in a defensible position here. So once you get that set up with towers on the side, on these sides here, and you have your production here in the middle, then you have some pretty safe mexes in the back, which can certainly come into play. But yeah, Therxy has had some questions about like, why does he get so far behind, and you know, how do you figure out what your opponent's doing? Like, how do you know that they're transitioning? How do you know they're going air? Like, whatever it is, you want to know what it is. So I kind of want to definitely talk about that, but also just talk about, like, why he's getting behind. And already I can tell you that he's a little bit behind because of these solars. You know, solars, they cost a lot of metal. You can see Therxy's metal is actually just 0 because he doesn't have anything going on. Or he doesn't have, you know, because he didn't go wind, I should say. You know, just spending all that metal on the solar. And now he's, like, slowly producing units. He doesn't have as many cons out. It's just, like, this compounding factor when you're talking about the early game. Now, solars can be faster in terms of time compared to wind. It can take too long to build wind if you're trying to, like, you know, progress forward. I will note, by the way, there are some ticks out on the map, but Ubivator is a strong player, so we'll probably see those all cleaned up as the game progresses. But yeah, just looking at the differences here, like Ubivator just now adding on the second solar, while Therxy already has plenty. So that is slowing him down because he's spending all that extra money on those solars. Now, solar is equivalent to wind when it comes to build time per energy made at 12 wind speed around, roughly speaking. So what that means is if wind is below 12, then solar is going to be a faster bang for your buck, whereas, you know, otherwise it's wind that's going to be faster. So with wind being closer to 20 at this point, you know, Therxy's not making, or, you know, it has taken kind of a long time to do that. And you also have to factor in the fact that you're spending so much metal in these solars that you just don't have as much starting stuff. And so you're kind of reliant on getting these mexes really, really quickly. It can be a nice thing to start with a solar or 2 in order to just get that early con out if the wind is quite low. But in this case, I think it's just like building on that many wind turbine, or sorry, that many solar collectors is really setting him behind because now he doesn't have the money to spend it on cons and upgrades and more units and whatnot. So, you know, it's kind of panning out. Like, he's kind of doing all right. He's got the armor value, he's got the metal value, but he is behind, or yeah, he's a little bit behind on energy production, even though he went solar. So it's just, I think Ubivator is gearing up to have more and more, you know, as he expands out and gets more mexes, he needs more energy, right? So he's just kind of like doing that really well. Meanwhile, let's take a look. Is there anything else Therxy's doing? No, just using his commander to continuously pump out units for the time being. While Ubivator's commander's moving out to grab mexes. You know, and this is a big difference as well, because the commander can build those mexes so quickly, having that 300 build power, you know, compared to the 80 or 85 that you get from your bot cons. So that's kind of a big deal. Apparently, Ubivator's gonna APM stall out a little bit, but yeah, Therxy's still adding on some solars here, and I think this is really, really hurting him. He could have actually made more energy for the amount of time spent building that if he had built wind at that moment. Now, wind can fluctuate a lot on this map. 2 to 20, like 20 is quite high, but 2 is quite low. So, you know, when you do a lot of wind, you want to have a lot of energy storage. Therxy actually taking a little bit of damage here from some grunts, but nothing too crazy. And yeah, Ubivator just looks at the high wind speed and says, you know what, I can afford a energy storage right now. You know, it's a good time to build that. It costs a lot of energy. We got plenty of energy right now. Therxy, meanwhile, has built vehicle plants, still has his bot lab. I think he meant to reclaim that fully. I'm not 100% sure at this point, but definitely a big blunder because you kind of want that metal to be able to spend it into vehicles. The other thing to consider with that vehicle transition is the vehicles require less energy for how much metal you're putting into it. They're more metal dense than energy compared to bots. So bots require more energy than vehicles, and vehicles require more metal than bots. So after that transition, you have a bit of a surplus of energy. You're just now building a storage, and that's great. I would even say maybe even get a second storage or start reclaiming some of these solars because you don't really need them. You know, I mean, Therxy is spending it right now, but that's primarily because he's had a stockpile of metal because of that transition. In that transitionary period, you're not making units, and so you're just kind of you know, starting to stockpile some of that metal. So just being a little bit slow on that. So now your army value actually is okay right now, but you know, because of all these solars, because of the commander move out primarily, actually, you're getting behind on the metal income. But yeah, you also still have this bot lab that you could reclaim. You have some solars that you could reclaim, and if you turn that all into units, you'd be able to fight a lot better. You'd be able to take, you'd be able to like apply a lot more pressure to these locations. You know, maybe snake around, try to find an angle. Pretty good job, by the way, on the micro, finding that. Just seeing that line of grunts walking down and attacking the points of that line is very strong indeed. So taking a nice trade there for sure. Certainly helps. And, you know, I guess that just means your micro is quite good, but, you know, there's certain things about the economy that maybe you're struggling with a little bit here. All right, so we got some air units coming out here from Ubivator, even adding on a Juno for mines since he saw that mine layer in that center of the map. But yeah, with those air units, they can get to places rather quickly. They can start taking mexes on this high ground that bot cons can't grab. So, I mean, it's certainly nice to have some air cons be able to put stuff in places where, you know, a ground army can't get to. There's a lot of grunts up here. Therxy sees it, so he's going to have to respond to that. Meanwhile, there's some more units coming from the center as well, so, you know, this is quite the threat. And, you know, while Therxy has more army value at the moment, I'm not even sure if this... okay, so this is only in metal, so if you're the vehicle player and you don't have the higher army value, you're in trouble. Because you need to be able to you know, be ahead when you're the vehicle player in terms of metal per army. So it's good that you are, in this case, you have a couple of energy storages now. Going into an air lab yourself, and yeah, I think this is actually kind of a bit of an issue at the moment as well, because, you know, when you go air, you're sacrificing some of your some of your ability to be on the ground. Like, you are going to have less ground units popping out, and so it's going to be harder to defend various locations. Now, I think you do have plenty of units out, so it's not really that big of an issue, but at the same time, Ubivator is a strong player, is able and very capable of making an air transition whenever he needs to. So he's, you know, already on fighters as well. You know, it's going to be able to shoo away or make sure that these Banshees don't do too much. I mean, actually, as it is, well, yeah, I mean, as it is, he doesn't actually have that much air, so I mean, maybe you can exploit this. I guess he did transition to T2 instead, and really, okay, so I guess just to speak to that a little bit, you know, when you see a player go air and you know that their ground force is going to be a little bit weaker, then you know all you need to do is build a little bit of anti-air to deal with the air that they have, and then you can kind of safely go T2 because you don't have to worry about them having as strong of a ground presence. Now, of course, from your point of view, you could potentially just say like, okay, I think you're going to do this because I went to air, therefore I'm just going to crank out a lot of units and then just shove them in there and do some damage. That's very, very much something that is possible to do. that I've seen quite a few times. That's really strong, actually. But yeah, instead, Therxy decided to go T2 for himself, realizing that, you know, Ubivator has a lot of units out as well. So, you know, it's just kind of a, I don't want to chance it. I don't want to risk doing something like that and just throw away units. And, you know, there's certain things, especially with Ubivator. Ubivator has been mixing in some interesting units lately, getting things like bed bugs. Like, you do not want any of those exploding on your army in any case, because they're so cheap and they can do so much damage. Yeah, like look at that. All those blitzes just like immediately erased for basically the price of a blitz, right? Like 69 metal put into each of those bed bugs. You know, and if you think about the blitz, it's what, I forget exactly actually. 110, right? 110 metal. So, you know, it's half the cost. So if you're able to do things like take out 2 blitzes with one of them, it's fantastic. But yeah, these players just kind of trading blows. Fighters coming in, taking care of business. But yeah, some friendly fighters for Therxy come in to save the Banshees as well. So, you know, Therxy's in a pretty good spot here. And I think here it's sort of like, okay, how do you know what your opponent's doing? I want to talk about that a little bit more. And I feel like maybe I should have talked about that a little bit sooner. But, you know, really, you know, you can kind of guess and check and figure out like, okay, I know that they're doing this, or this would be a reasonable play because I'm doing this. You know, it's sort of like you can figure out what they're doing based on what you're doing, because they need to counter what you're doing, right? Or they need to make a play based on that. And I think that's a big part of Bar, is just figuring that out. You know, I think Therxy's actually in a lot of trouble here because he spent so much on air units. Now you got to worry about all these ground forces running in there. And I think Ubivator just like correctly looking at the situation and saying, look, if you're going to spend that much on air, I know your ground's going to be weak. Therefore, I can push ground and you can't deal with it as easily, especially if you're pushing something as cost effective as a bed bug. So, you know, they do get taken out. Didn't really do a lot of damage there in particular, but I mean, they still did some damage for very, very little cost. So, you know, just a very cost effective type of thing. Now, in terms of precise units, it's really hard to figure out what they're going to have. You just kind of need to poke around and see what they are. And when it comes to T2, it can be a little bit difficult. You know, now looking at Therxy's camera here, or sorry, not camera, but at least the view to see, you know, what does he know about? What does he know exists, and what does he see as dots? Because these dots you don't necessarily know. I mean, you could guess there's a mech here, there's a mech here, there's maybe an LT or two, maybe one of those is sumo, since you just saw sumo here. You know, these units flying around quickly, that's obviously air. I think we all kind of know this stuff. But yeah, you can kind of figure it out based on radar. You can figure it out based on like, okay, if I send a unit in, what do I see? And I don't necessarily need to commit to sending it in. I just need it to go far enough to see something. So little tidbits like that to see what's going on, I think is very important. It helps a lot to just figure out what do you need to do. But yeah, going back to what I was saying before, like it really comes down to like, you know, so you transitioned into vehicles, right? And you're not able to push at that time because of macro mistakes or because of stuff going on in your base. You're just not managing it as well in terms of your energy and not reclaiming some of the solars and stuff like that. And because of that, your opponent sees you don't have that many units, and then you both go air, and you're applying some pressure with air. He's defending it, you know, with his own air. But then you make so many fighters that it just becomes this thing where you can easily transition into T2 and not worry about a ground assault, because your ground assault is not going to really exist because you built so much air. So I think just like you showing that air signals like, hey, there is no real ground threat. You both have like similar numbers in terms of units, so it's a good time to go T2. I'm not 100% sure, but I think Ubivator was sitting in a pretty good defensive spot to be able to go T2 safely. Just looking at, like, if you're just taking air out of the equation, you know, in terms of ground forces, what does he see from you? What does he know that he has? And just like navigating that and saying like, okay, it's safe for me to go T2 right now. But yeah, T2 keeps getting added on here. There's probably a lot of Sheldons out. And yeah, just seeing these sumos and things. I think this is just like brilliance from Ubivator. I gotta point that out too. Is like there's some really good moves that Ubivator's making. He's making like exactly what he needs for the situation. And you know, early on that's bed bugs because T1 units don't have much range, so there's not much that you can do. You know, in terms of T1, and then like the bed bugs can kind of just like show up and surround your army, and then it's like, oh, okay, whoops. And then using things like, I mean, and when it comes to the bed bugs, it really has to do with the spy bots as well. Just having the spectators be able to do things like this, and then run in with a bunch of bed bugs, like that's gotta be so efficient. Like that's not a ton of metal being spent there. Like let's look at the spy bot cost. Like yeah, so 165 for a spy bot, 69 for a bed bug. I mean, these guys do have energy that you got to consider as well, but at the same time, it's really cheap on metal, and that allows you to spend that metal on other things such as upgrading your mexes, getting your fusions, you know, upgrading your economy so that you can support a better T2 army eventually. But yeah, I think Therxy is in quite a bit of trouble at this point. Actually, just, I guess Therxy taps out, but yeah, just looking at what Ubivator has, like just the moves that he made to get to this point. You know, he you know, looks at the situation, sees that there's vehicles, and he has bots, and I don't actually know who went air first, but either way, I mean, I think it was Therxy that went air first with the number of Banshees that were out, and once those showed up, he just builds his own air lab and, you know, defends against the Banshees, you know, and so you need to protect the Banshees, so you get fighters, and it becomes this thing of like, well, if you can't do enough with your Banshees, then, you know, they're just kind of sitting around or dead and not doing anything, and that allows Ubivator to, you know, to make a transition into T2. So I think it's just like this, this situation where when you go air, like you don't have much firepower with Banshees. You don't have that much ability to do things like that. And let's say you went bomber, like maybe that's a question. It's like, okay, if you went bomber here, you could potentially do some damage, you know. But at this level of play, like bombers don't do as much as it does at lower levels because players will spread out their wind turbines a little bit more. Now, this is only a spread of 1 on these wind turbines, so like you probably could have done some damage with bombers there. That's the kind of play that I like to make. Is like, I see you go in T2, so I'll bomb, you know, and then after the bomber, I'll build like a T2 lab, get a T2 constructor out, sell the lab, get more T1 units, and apply a lot of pressure with T1 while I'm upgrading, stuff like that. You know, and Ubivator's plan, you know, of course, was going into bed bugs after that T2 lab, just something really nice and cheap, getting those specters out, those ghosts, to be able to stun units and use the bed bugs to just roll in there and destroy them. I mean, that's so cost efficient, especially if it's done on large groups of units. So just really well played with that. And then just like as the game progressed, added on things like mammoths and sumos, and then all of a sudden, you know, you got to worry about this whole different unit set instead of just the bed bugs, as well as the Sheldons and whatnot. So lots going on in this game. Hopefully I don't sound too much like a broken record, but I just wanted to point those things out. Obviously, there's other things that can happen, like what if your opponent goes amphibious and there's water on the map? You know, like what if your opponent goes bombers? Like, how do you know? How do you make the right call for that, right? Like Therxy, or, you know, both players are building fighters, and it's like at that point, you don't know if your opponent's going to switch into bombers. You just don't know. Like, you can't know. You could try to scout. You can try to send your fighters in to fight their fighters to figure out like who has more fighters and stuff like that. But end of the day, I think it's sort of like just spread your stuff so that you can't get bombed so easily. Or if you do get bombed, it's not much damage. You know, I think that's the best way to deal with bombers, personally, is just make sure your buildings are spread out. You know, because you can't just overcommit to building anti-air everywhere and having all these fighters out and stuff like that. Like, it's just not, like, you're just going to spend too much money on it and then just get crushed by it. So yeah, spread out, you know, get anti-air when you need it, not really like that far ahead of time. But either way, when that happens when the bombers come out, like you want to make sure that you have radar in forward positions, like something like here, because then you can see all the way out here, and you can see that like really early on when the bombers start coming out. Same thing with the sides. Obviously, like you need something on the sides as well, so that you can quickly react to the bombers. But obviously, they traverse the map pretty quickly, and end up getting bombs in, and you take a little bit of damage. But you take, once you clear the bombers, it's like, well, assuming that you didn't overcommit to anti-air defense, they shouldn't really do that much. Like they should get some damage, but that should be fine. Just take a little bit of damage, destroy all the bombers, and someone will be ahead after that, obviously. But either the bombers will be a large price, they didn't really do enough. That what am I trying to say? I just like lost everything. So like the bombers don't do enough, and they just costed too much, and now that player's like kind of in trouble because of that. Or B, you didn't spread your buildings, or you took too much damage, didn't kill the bombers fast enough in time, or whatever, and either the game just straight up is over, or um, or you piece together, some kind of assault or something with ground forces attack. If you aren't able to do that, and they went bombers and spent a lot on bombers, then you're in some real trouble, because if your opponent is far enough ahead that they can afford a bunch of bombers, and you can't afford a defense, and you can't attack because you don't have enough units out, well, then you were already lost before that moment, because you're just so behind on stuff. So um, I don't know. I wouldn't worry about the bombers too much. Um, just spread your buildings. Is what I have to say about that. Um, and then yeah, for the T2 transition, you can kind of assume around a certain time it's going to happen. Um, but also just like, are they bolstering their forces up front? You can kind of see that. You kind of poke around through your units and see, like, are they continuously adding on units? And to that, I would also say that if you're adding on ground forces and they spend a big chunk of money on T2 and getting out, the constructor and upgrading mexes and stuff like that, you are likely ahead on army value. And you should be able to push with that. If you can't push with that, and they could afford to have enough army and defenses to defend you, plus have T2, then you've already lost. You're already far enough behind that you can't do anything. So you might as well push and see how, try to make it happen, and then just delay your own T2 a little bit. And I've seen that happen so many times in really high level replays. Where someone goes T2 and then they just lose for it. Like maybe not immediately, but they get far enough behind that the game is basically in a losing state because they went T2, because they don't have enough ground forces to defend against the other player who, instead of going T2, just made T1 units. So I don't know. I don't know if you're going to take my advice. You are a higher level than I am. But yeah, just throwing all that out there, and throwing it out there for anybody else that's watching my videos. Because I think it's all really good stuff. And I don't know, hopefully with all my RTS experience and all my strategic thinking, like hopefully I know something. But yeah, anyways, I hope you guys learned something. I know it was a little bit more of an informative cast than an actual like cast. So I apologize for anyone looking for more of a cast. But also trying to just help people learn. Anyways, I'm Zeteo. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. What? Oh, it's the